Hi everyone. So today I'm talking to David Farmer. He's going to be sharing with us his story, and then we're going to be covering all kinds of topics, mostly focusing on post-awakening and how it affects our lives, but also our relationships, and also the kind of issues that may came up after awakening that so many people are dealing with, but that are not necessarily often talked about. And I would like to say that if you have any questions or topics you'd like me or David to talk about, then please let us know in the comments or email me. You will find my email in the description. And then we will basically get together again and answer those questions. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi everyone, welcome to Coffee Break with Your Soul. My name is Maggie, and today I am continuing the sort of series which I actually only started recently. It's called Ordinary People, Ordinary Awakenings, and my intention behind this little project is to really just demonstrate that awakening, as life-changing as it really is not unattainable. It's not reserved to only certain people, that literally it's available to every single person on this planet who is interested in it, who's open to it. But actually very often it happens even to people who never had any interest in these sort of things, and it sort of happens out of the blue. So there are no rules, and by speaking to various people, I just want to show through their stories that it is really something that's available to all of us at any point in our lives. And today I'm talking to David Farmer, who I hope is going to not only share his story, but also some of his insights and lessons that he learned along that path towards awakening and then post-awakening. So hi, David.
Hi, Maggie. How are you?
I'm really good. We had a little chat before that, and it's so nice to talk to someone who likes to laugh as much as I do. It's really great.
Yeah.
So I think we're just gonna dive straight in, and I would like to start from asking you about perhaps what actually put you on this path, on this spiritual
Oh,
path. What was your life like? What was going on that led you to even explore these topics of awakening or enlightenment?
yeah. The story of David really this the spiritual side of it anyway was really from about 2006, something like that. I was actually living in Japan, and I'd been living in Japan from about 2003, April 2003, until last month. Actually, I've just moved back to Scotland, so 18 years I spent in Japan.
Wow.
And yeah, there was going to Japan was a great adventure for me. Something I really wanted to do. I felt I'd been leading up to that for some time, and then of course, being in Japan, you're around all this. So this is sort of the when you're young, and as I was at that time, not anymore. But
Oh, come on. It's all a matter of perspective.
I deliberately adjusted the lighting so you can't see the grey too much here.
Oh yeah, I found some more recently as well. Yeah.
So I yeah, so I was in Japan and living my dream, which is something I really wanted to do. I wanted to go there for. And about 3 years into living there, my father passed away back in Scotland, and which was rather, so obviously a very traumatic time for myself personally, obviously the family as a whole. And I flew back to Scotland from Japan, had to deal with all of that, and stayed for about a month, and then flew back to Japan again because that was where my life was. But then going back to Japan by myself, arriving back there, that's where all these questions started coming up, like, okay, what's the point of it all then? What am I doing? You know, what? These all started to come up. And I wanted to get to the bottom of it. And I started reading a lot. Every weekend I would dive into the local bookstore. Is a very good bookstore in Tokyo, which does all English books and a big sort of spiritual self-help section. So diving there and devouring books, and at the same time trying to meditate. So I kind of felt like somehow I was in a good place in Japan, because you're surrounded by all this sort of Buddhism and Shintoism, and if you wanted to go and visit a temple, there was one down the street. It wasn't as if they were hard to come by. So I felt like, well, maybe this is the right place to get into this, and that's really how it kind of started.
So what happens next? How did that process look like? How long it lasted for you?
About 15 years of seeking, if you like. And during that 15 years, I did a lot of meditation at home. I didn't really go to do any sort of formal things at a temple, although I could have done, but I didn't really do that at home. And so I bought one of those cushions, that you can buy for meditation. I bought one of those and did that. And I did other things. I did Japanese archery for a while. It's sometimes known as, in the West, sometimes known as Zen archery. So again, although that was interesting, because archery was something I used to do with my dad. So there was sort of a connection there. And not only could I do archery again, but I guess because I kind of wanted to feel some connection with him, but there was that spiritual element to Japanese archery. Sometimes in the West is known as Zen archery, although in Japan, Zen and Japanese archery are sort of separated. They don't confuse the two things. Nonetheless, there was a huge sort of spiritual, the peacefulness, the quietness of that art really attracted me. So I got into that for quite a while, about 6 years or so. So there was this sort of process of, for want of a better word, going on. And during that time, lots of sort of aha, or so little things that sort of resonated.
Tell me a little bit. Do you even remember the sort of first glimpses or insights that you had that were sort of memorable?
Yeah, I think there was two kind of moments. The first one was really when I read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and that I was at a Japanese archery event, and I met a Zen monk who was an American guy, but was a Zen monk in Japan. Very interesting chap. And he was doing a lecture, and I talked to him afterwards, and got his email address, and then I think I emailed him later and said, "Do you recommend any books or something like that?" And he said, "Yeah, I recommend 2 books. One was The Power of Now, and the other one was called Everyday Zen. I think it was Everyday Zen by an American Zen teacher, Charlotte Joko Beck." Those 2 books were great, but it was The Power of Now that really sort of first got this. I first understood the separation between the awareness of the witnessing presence and your thoughts. And so that was when that first came, and I was like, oh, right. Oh, you're not your thoughts. Oh, yeah. And so that was when that first came, I think. But of course, there's still quite a lot of ego in that. That sort of, I am aware, I am not my thoughts. And the ego is still very strong there. But that was the first sort of one of my aha moments, I think.
And then?
And then there was another one, I think later, the one I sort of remember was the awareness being, when you finally establish yourself as the witnessing presence, and you're kind of spending more time as this awareness, witnessing everything. There's this phrase which often comes up, which you have to be aware of awareness. And that was quite confusing at first, because
it's such a bizarre way of saying that. Yeah.
I thought, oh my God, there's another awareness there. But I thought I was awareness, but no, there's another one. Oh, really? oh, I thought that was it. Oh, it's not. And then that confused me for ages and ages.
Mm-hmm.
And until you realize, well, it's not actually two awarenesses. It's consciousness being aware of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that was somewhere I got sort of, there was an initial sort of aha there.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, after that, I kind of got quite tired of reading, which was interesting because you really do get exhausted of that. And I think, although I didn't realize it at the time, it's only really looking back when you sort of analyze and you see, oh, yeah, that's why. But it's really, the mind gets exhausted of that searching through books. And it starts to realize that, well, the answer is not there. And it just sort of gives up on it, really. And then it was really sort of last year, the tail end of last year, there was a lot going on in my private life, family things going on, which was a lot of sort of upheaval again. And then it was through, after that, sort of toward this year, in February this year, I was sitting at home one day and I thought, I was looking for something to watch on Netflix, and I just stumbled upon the documentary of The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, and the original documentary. And so I thought, oh, I'll just watch that tonight, and I was sitting with my dinner and watching the TV. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting, the law of attraction, and you can positive thinking. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And so I heard this name, Rhonda Byrne. I was checking her on YouTube. And when something she had said in one of her interviews, that she really resonated with what David Bingham was saying. And of course, David is now very well known through the book, The Greatest Secret, which I had actually ordered, interestingly enough. It hadn't arrived yet, but I'd actually sort of ordered it. And I was sort of between having watched The Secret and waiting for The Greatest Secret, the book there to arrive. I was between this. And I thought, oh, David Bingham, and that sounds the same name. It's kind of sounds interesting. And so I checked on YouTube and came across one of his interviews on Conscious TV. And I thought, well, there might be some sort of introduction and stuff at the beginning, so I'll scroll past it a bit. And I moved along and I just tapped play. And the first thing I heard him say was, "Your infinite consciousness having a human experience." And I just went, oh. And then I just started laughing. And it was as simple as that. And it was just, it was just recognized in that moment with that one phrase. And that was it. And I laughed and laughed and laughed. And when I think back to it, I really want to cry sometimes when I think of it, because it was so simple. It's there all the time. And it was just recognized in that moment. And that's not to say that phrase will particularly resonate with everybody, but it was just at that particular moment, like the fruit was ready to just drop off the trees.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was really, and it was so. I love how you've called your program, about ordinary awakenings, because it's such an ordinary thing. There's nothing, you don't. A lot of people imagine that it's going to be, thunderbolts and lightning and some amazing experience, but it's all just the mind stuff. It's really all it is a recognition of who you really are, and realizing in that moment, you realize that the I doesn't exist and never did. It was just a thought that was in your head. But what a crazy thought, and what a strong thought, and what a lot of trouble that thought causes
right,
for people who believe it.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, there are two things that came to mind as I was listening to you. That first of all, there's really something in this, when we seek, when we're seeking, and we go very often from one book to the next, from one teacher to the next, And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I really think that this is such a normal part of this process, you know. And but I think it's so easy to get lost in those concepts and ideas, and very often, depending on who we come across or what teaching or what book, sometimes it can sound so incredibly out of touch and complicated, and you know, so many people who are in particular not into spirituality and not familiar with this language, you know, it puts them off straight away, which is one of the reasons why I am not a big fan. I like to keep things, you know, big fan of these concepts and big words, and you know, I just really like to keep it simple. And so I think it's really interesting how often you hear people say, I've been seeking, I've been reading, I've been meditating and doing this and that. And honestly, they get to the point where they're just so exhausted, you know, and it's actually the moment they give up the seeking, the reading, the whatever they've been doing, when, you know, it just pops.
Like, yeah, because they've run out of possibilities, you know, and people, you know, they think that they're going to find the answer in all of that, in the mind stuff, and they're looking, and all of that seeking is just looking outwards, looking to the next book, and maybe the next book will give me that thing, that one thing, maybe the next book, and it's constant doing, going from one teacher to the next, and maybe something will not, but it's all just stuff of the mind. And so what needs to happen is that you have to better to recognize that what is it prior to all of that, where are all these questions and doubts coming from, and when you go deeper into that and sort of step out of the thinking, you realize, well, there's only one thing which I cannot doubt at all, which is my being. The I am, the beingness is the one thing in all of that you cannot doubt. And if you just stay there, well, there you are. but of course, the mind has this incredible momentum, and people can get just sucked back into that thinking again. But you know, in the end of it, I mean, it's interesting because it is the mind that recognizes it in the end. It's the mind that goes, oh yeah, but because it's the mind that's invented the I, and therefore the mind has tried to invent it in this thing of enlightenment. And there's no such thing as enlightenment. There's only beingness. There's only cognition. That's why I think it's difficult to describe all these things in words, as we know. It's almost impossible. That's why these conversations are so interesting, because when we go talk about something which cannot be described in words, we have to do our best and
yet we're trying, right? And yet we're trying.
Try not to use any kind of sloppy language that may sort of confuse people, but it's just constant. It's your cognition is always there, your beingness is always there, and that's why it's kind of it's not a sort of enlightenment. It's not an awakening. It's just a recognition of your true nature. That comes, of course, because the mind is dualistic, and that's where it comes from. The mind has subscribed to this idea of being limited, being this limited I, and therefore it subscribes to the idea of some way out of that, which is what the mind is called enlightenment. You can't have one without the other. You can't have, same as you cannot have, if you subscribe to the idea of something being hot, you naturally also subscribe to something being cold, because they exist together. Birth and death, for example, another one. And so it's interesting that in the end the mind sort of does go, oh yeah, and in that realizes that there never was anybody there in the first place, which is the funny part.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I actually did a very, very short video, I think last week or this week, I don't even know anymore, but where I talked exactly about that, that, you know, we have this language which is limited and it's okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can, because ultimately, I experienced my awakening through these conversations as well. I just heard something, you know, basically this is how I would describe it. I just basically, you know how there are things that we hear all the time. Like I'm sure you probably heard someone say that, you know, we're just having this, you know, we're this spiritual beings having human experience. I'm sure you heard that before. I'm sure you read this in other books, and yet for whatever reason, it was in that particular moment when you heard David say it that somehow, you know, it clicked. So I think the language is not a problem, because even the recognition is, to me, the word recognition is yet another sort of label. It's yet another way we try to describe the thing that can't be really described but only experienced, right? So I think it doesn't matter whether we call it enlightenment, awakening, recognition, self-realization, whatever. I think, and I don't know whether you'd agree, that I think what matters is not to get so attached to what words we're using, what concepts we're using, but remember rather what those words are actually pointing to.
Yeah, that's right. And
you know?
it really, yes, exactly. And everybody will describe things in different ways. And that's ultimately why seekers seek it, is they go from one person, and those words don't mean something to me, and they go somewhere else to listen to other words and things. And they got caught up in this world of words. And as you just said earlier, it's only when you step out of that, you sort of give up on all that, then this comes. But this really coming is coming. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the words are, or really the circumstances. As you said, you know, I may have read that. I may have read that 10 years earlier, but it wasn't. Everything really hadn't sort of was ready to resonated at that time, because there is a sort of I mean, as you said at the beginning, it can really happen to anybody anytime. There's no sort of rules to this. But once you do sort of start on this spiritual journey, there is a sort of a need for a sort of calming of thoughts, and a sort of discipline of the mind. And then when that is sort of ripe, if you like, then there's a possibility for this something to resonate and result in a recognition. But there's nobody controlling that. That's the interesting thing. It's all just happening. It's all just happening of itself. And the mistake is that you think of yourself as an eye who's going to find something, or there's something that you can do that's going to find it. But actually, the truth of the matter is, it's all just happening. It's all just, you know, and when things don't just happen in that particular way, then true nature is seen. And
I think this is why I'm not also a big fan of, you know, these grand extreme statements. Oh, there is no path, there is no process. Because when you're looking from that perspective, once you have awakened, yes, I can understand that it looks to you that way, but it's not it really isn't useful for those who are still seeking. And I find it slightly unfair, and almost I don't want to say arrogant, because oh my god, such a big judgment, but you know, sorry spiritual police out there, but you know what I mean. It's almost like I think it is not helping anybody who's just at the start of this journey to say, oh, you know, there's nothing to do, and you know, there is no process, and there is nobody really, so you know, whatever.
There's a couple of things I want to really say about that. One is that, you're absolutely right, that it's it's kind of a wrecking ball approach to the whole thing, that you just say there's no you and there's nothing you can do, so that's it, sort of thing. Just this, okay. Well, yes and no. Yes, you're right in saying that there is no you, and really there is nothing you can do. However, from the point of view of the entity who is seeking, there is an I stuck there. And for anybody who's done any kind of teaching, I've done a lot of language teaching in Japan, and you really have to, go from where the student is at. And of course, you're aware that, when the illusion of the I is resolved within yourself, then of course you then realize that there is no I in anybody else either. It's like when I think the Buddha said that when enlightenment comes, the whole world is enlightened, because you realize that I doesn't exist in anybody. However, from the point of view of that entity who believes in the I, just going and saying, there is no I, and it's kind of like just sort of such a sort of rough and ready approach to the whole thing. But I think it's something that's really, I don't know, I've been thinking about this a little bit recently. It's something that's maybe come of the time. We're in a time now where people want answers quickly. We're in this internet age of immediate gratification. You can get any answer to anything you want thanks to Google. And I think it's just something that has come from that, perhaps. Whereas, like back in the 60s or whatever, if you wanted to or interested in all these type of things, you had to jet off to India and live in a cave for 20 years and grow a beard and stuff, So, so it's something that seems to have come from the time. But no, I absolutely agree with that. There's not, it's like the story of there's a very famous story in Indian philosophy about the lady who lost her necklace. And this lady goes to her friend's house and has tea or whatever, and then goes back home, and then she starts panicking because she thinks she's lost her necklace. So she runs back to her friend's house, and her friend says, hey, it's just around your neck. So the necklace was there all the time. So was it necessary to go back to her friend's house? Well, yes and no. Okay, it's there all the time, but she didn't recognize it.
Yeah. So
therein lies so in a way it was necessary to go back to the friend's house to have it pointed out. So yeah, I agree. I don't want to go too much into this.
It's Dev and I were also talking about it, and I said that it comes across in a really such a bizarre way when you have. And again, I'm not making it personal. It's just about how things are being sort of conveyed in such a strange way, where you have a teacher saying, there's nothing to do. But hey, my retreat starts, in a couple of months, in Hawaii or something. And so
I need teachers to attend.
Right. So if there's nothing to do, then why the hell would I bother coming to your Hawaii retreat, paying all this money if there's nothing for me to be found there? In fact, there is no me. so what's the point?
Yeah, it's so contradicted. So I think it's something that is really, it's sort of I hope it's a sort of flash in the pan that's come from this sort of internet generation. I think what is I'd really like to see now is that really from now this is so available to everybody, and like you said in your introduction, I think it was really beautiful that it's something that from now people really need to be able to feel it's available to them. It's right there. It's who you are right at this very moment. And you do not need to go to some teacher and attend some big, seminar, whatever it is. That was fine for a period, but I think I feel somehow we're getting out of that, where it can really come about by friendly people talking to each other as friends on this sort of level footing, just as we're talking now, and I really think this is the way that it can sort of manifest from now on. We're really just ordinary people sitting at home, just listening to this and going, oh yeah, and getting it, you know.
Yeah.
So this type.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go
ahead. Yeah, I think that, you know, for as long as someone is open to it, and like I said, and even sometimes people who are not open to it, it happens to them out of the blue.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I think it really, all it takes is just being open to it. And then, you know, if you feel compelled to read something, it resonates, do it. If it doesn't, don't do it. If there's a teacher that resonates with you, stay with that teacher. If whatever another person says, even though it's like followed by millions of people, but whatever they say doesn't resonate at all, leave it. I think it's important to just follow your own inner sort of
that's right.
guidance in that process. And so I will insist on that once we are sort of open to it, there is a process, but that process will be very different. Even though there may be similarities, that process will be different to different people. So, you know, there will be a person that it may take 15 years, 30 years, you know, to really, for things to sort of really click. And there will be people that it will take 5 months, 5 days, 1 day, one conversation, right? You know, there is, which is why I think it's so futile also to be comparing ourselves. I think it's amazing I think it's important to listen to these stories, because those stories are one way of conveying that, but it's important to not really get attached to anybody else's story, not to mention compare.
Yes, I think that's exactly. Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to pick up on there. The one is the comparison thing, which is something that seems to be so deeply ingrained in the subconscious that you know, comparing this teacher to that teacher, my status to that person's status, and that is something which really is quite laborious and ultimately irrelevant and not terribly useful. I think what you were saying there about going on your hunch or going on what you're feeling, I think that was really, really excellent, because I think, you know, part of the seeking thing, again, as we said, is as much as in the mind. Going here or there, you hear of somebody, hear of that teacher, I'll go there. Whereas something that really was helpful to me, which was especially in the months following this sort of recognition, there was a certain integration process that sort of happened, and which is different for everybody. And some people can have this integration, can get over through this integration process fairly quickly. Some people may take longer. But there is a certain sort of ruffling up of you, the body and the mind and the energy and things when this happens. Why? Because there's been such an investment in this I, which is really just a contraction of energy. And when this contraction is released, when that realization of there not being in the I comes, and there's really a sort of release of energy, which comes out in laughter usually when we realize, but it's a release of energy. And so upon that, there's a sort of you get sort of out of alignment. And I felt slightly out of alignment. And something that was pointed out to me, which really was useful, was thinking about the 5 koshas, or the 5 bodies that we have. So physical body, the energetic body, the emotion mind, and the intuition and the bliss body, all contained within and through infinite consciousness. And And what was really useful was I found that I was quite blissful. In fact, I was quite blissed out for most of the time after this recognition.
The cloud nine period.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
it was fun. I was just sitting, and I'm talking about clouds. I was just sitting in my chair in Japan. I was just sitting, looking at the clouds and just feeling blissful, and that was great. But of course, then you have to get on with stuff and go to work and things like that. And when these, life started kicking back in again, I felt this sort of being slightly out of alignment. And what was very useful was to think about things in terms of the five koshas and realize, okay, right, well, I'm in this blissful state. And it was very useful to function more from the intuition. And I found that when I started doing that, working more on gut feelings and urges, and I feel like doing it, so there's an urge comes to do that. And that was much more, of course, it's much more intuitive way of living. And everything else, your body and everything still functions. There's urge to eat, there's urges to do this and that, and there's much less thinking involved. And so the seeker's struggle is that they're thinking too much. I'll go there, I'll read this, I'll do that. I'm trying to find on that level. But if you step out of that into this really coming from the intuitive body, then things sort of come into much more solid alignment. And so what you're saying about, reading this and doing that and whatever is, yes, absolutely fine. If that's the feeling that comes there. And if that's so, rather than being caught up in the head, really operating from the intuition. And I think even for myself as an integration, that was very useful. But for people who are still sort of identifying as seekers, as also, I think, very, very useful.
Yeah, and it takes time, I mean, some people, again, there's so many different ways people experience it, both in their awakenings, which I don't know what you think about that, but I personally, and of course this is only my perspective, I don't like to look at anything that has to do with awakenings as something finite. So for example, when I feel the term fully realized, and I'm absolutely aware that this is just yet another way to describe this, but I immediately, something just doesn't resonate with me when I hear it, because to me it is just illogical to me, because it's not even common sense to call it that way, because we are infinite beings, right? And consciousness is infinite. And so the idea that there are some levels, a number of levels, and that's it, or that there is a final destination in this, it just doesn't make much sense.
Exactly, that's where words and things fall apart, and you hear a lot of people saying things like enlightened being, which is ridiculous. It's like contradiction in terms. There's there's no such thing as an enlightened person. Yeah, that's where sort of words and things really, really fall apart. But and that's fine. It's such a liberation to allow the words and things to fall apart, because you step out of all of that and just simply be, and just you are this infinite being. You are this open space. And just to be as that, and allow everything to manifest as it does, and yeah, of course there's a lot of, for people who are still attached to the I, there's a lot of fear in that idea, because for them that would, that just allowing everything to be, or it would be chaos, but that's because they're still attached to this idea that there's an I. But the fact of the matter is that all is just manifesting. It's all just happening and there's no I who's in control of any of it. So yeah, you're right. Within infinite consciousness, it is infinite. It's just this open space of awareness, which you can just. There's not even being in it. It's just that's who you are, and it's just this, and it's beautiful.
It is beautiful, and what's also beautiful, and I've been actually exploring this recently, is so few people talk about the non-glamorous side of post-awakening, because you know, and again, probably innocently, very often there's this idea being perpetuated, very, very salesish, very marketing, like, you know, awaken, and after that, there's going to be nothing but bliss. You know, there's going to be nothing but, you know, Zen feeling, and everything is just going to be pink colors and roses and unicorns, and, you know, you get the gist. And unfortunately, very often awakening is actually, I actually recently heard someone describe that how they see enlightenment. The enlightenment has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about. It has to do with the fact that our awakening sheds a light onto things that we are attached to. So, and sometimes it happens in a very painful way, because when we awaken, all of a sudden we become aware of all those things that are of the mind, all the beliefs, ideas that have been running the show, you know, often our entire lives. And when they start falling away, it can be incredibly sort of unsettling, to say the least. And you know, it takes getting used to it. And I remember how frightened I've been of the idea. I was of this process, but actually what I've been recently experiencing, I've been experiencing a lot of emotional turmoil that it seems to come, you know, like it's in my body. It's not even in my mind anymore. It's something in my body that seems to be going on. And you know, it's really one of the most amazing things that that I'm discovering still 10 years into, since that moment happened for me, is how much I'm actually, that those emotions are really disturbing and painful. There's a lot of pain that I've been experiencing recently, and yet there's beauty to this. There's such beauty to this that I've never seen before, and it allows me to lean in, as opposed to try to escape it or change it or gloss it over, or you know, or not to mention, there's so many people that think, you know, I'm awakened and therefore I should not be feeling this way, right? Which in of itself is causing a lot of unnecessary turmoil. So I think there's so much that's not being talked about, that those things come up afterwards. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's really a great point. And it's, as you say, you know, the mind has created this idea of enlightenment and as being some kind of rosy, as you say, you know, roses and unicorns, because it suffers as the I. And so because it's suffering as the I, is limited as the I, it manufactures this idea that there's something which is beautiful, and then it's going to be a fantastic experience, and an experience to end all experiences, etc., which we've talked about. So, but of course, what really happens is when there is this release of energy, when the I is recognized to not exist and never have to have existed. There is this release, and of course all the stuff that has been shoved down and hidden away and kept locked up, that you don't want to show anybody, you don't want to feel that, don't want to think that I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't think that, all that stuff that you've been shoving down and locked away, well, all that, lo and behold, comes out, which is not a bad thing. I mean, there's nothing good or bad about it. It's just where it does start coming out. And of course, in my case, it did. Well, and I think I could bet money in most people's cases it does. It's just simply whether the entity, the person, not that there's a person, but the person has that kind of ability to really deal with that and just allow it to come up. I think you mentioned people where there's suddenly this recognition appears, and people who have had no spiritual inclinations or that at all. For many of them, it can just happen, and oh wow, okay, great, and they get on with their life and no problem.
Right.
For others, it can be terrible because they don't know what's happening with them.
Yeah.
And there can be quite a traumatic period of suddenly something weird has happened, and of course nobody around them knows what they're talking about. They think they're mad, and all this stuff can come out, and there's nobody to talk to and things. So yeah, but of course that's why from a seeker's point of view, it's often not a bad thing to be doing sort of meditation type practices to sort of still the thoughts, to have this neutral base of observation, and to see things coming up, and just allow them to be. Because yes, as you say, when this energetic sort of release comes, and all this subconscious stuff starts coming up. But of course, the difference is this time that there is no I who is feeling these things. So if there's pain coming up, there's just pain, and it's just allowed to be. There's no letting go of it. A lot of people talk about this letting go. I must let go, which can maybe resonate with some people. For me, it feels, when you say that there's something bad that you need to get rid of. It's sort of letting be, allowing to be whatever is coming up, because now that there's the recognition of you being this infinite consciousness is also, at the same time, there's this recognition of you being unconditional love. And when you're there just as open awareness, unconditional love, whatever comes up is allowed to come up, and it dissolves quickly in most cases in that. It's when there's any resistance, you've probably heard this phrase, whatever you resist persists. And so it's really true that if that comes up, even after a so-called awakening or recognition of nature, after that, there's still can be a sort of momentum there which is carried along, and you may want to sort of resist something. But in most cases, in my particular case, that when things came up, they were seen to come up and they just dissolve immediately. There's no resistance in that. And I think can be reassuring to know that this is a perfectly natural thing and there's nothing to worry about. Yes, as you say, it's important to point out that it's not all rainbows and unicorns. All really happening is that the I is not there, and therefore there's no resistance and no conflict there anymore. And whatever comes up is allowed to do so, and it goes, it disappears. It's just there and it goes. And this was very reassuring for me, because I had read about the multitude of books that I had read over the years. One of them really was fantastic, which was this book called I Am That, which is a book of conversations between seekers and the great Indian teacher Nisargadatta. There's one little conversation in there where I can't remember exactly, I'll just paraphrase it, but it was something along the lines of the seeker the person asked, do you have any troubles or any pains or any psychological junk or whatever? And he said quite unequivocally, yes, of course I do. And this was when he was when he was an old man, and he said, yeah, of course I do. It comes up, but it's immediately recognized it, and it dissipates into infinite love, infinite consciousness. because there's no resistance there. There's nothing, nobody there to. So because as long as you're going along, you know, as long as it's going along, it's absorbing stuff through the senses, through your perceptions. It's absorbing stuff, and whatever is absorbed, there's an echo of it in your body, and so, you know, it's just part of life. And so, and of course, the stuff that you've shoved down for years and years, when there's no resistance to that will all start to come up. But yeah, it's allowed to do so. It's allowed to be and dissipate, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, but this is why I think it's very important to talk about this, because you know, sure. I've listened to a few conversations recently with incredible humans. I was just like in awe listening to them, that talk with such vulnerability and honesty about the post-awakening stuff that was really hitting them hard. And they were so honest about it. That in of itself was just beautiful to witness and to watch, because they were authentic, they were real, and to me, if I were to say what it means to be awakened, it's really just being allowing ourselves to be human fully, and being real and being authentic, and not resisting, not being afraid of the human experience in its entirety, even when it means pain that shows up, or any kind of suffering and stuff like that. And so I think it really is worth talking about it, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard, you know, people telling stories how, in particular, if they were part of some kind of spiritual communities, there was this sense that they when they started suffering out after awakening, can you hear the phone ringing?
No.
Okay, good. Because it's just that my phone, my stationary phone that rings like twice a year, is for some reason started ringing now. But anyway, there are so many people that you know, told me how if they were part of a certain community or around certain teacher, they felt like they couldn't talk about the fact that they were suffering, that something showed up, and they would pretend, and they would pretend, you know, that they were okay when really they weren't. And so because of that in itself, they were suffering even more unnecessarily. And that somehow they carried this another belief or idea that once you've experienced awakening, or not to mention like multiple awakenings, you know, that this should not be happening to you anymore. And that idea again alone is creating more emotional turmoil than necessary, right?
Correct. And no, you're absolutely right. And it's something, you know, from when we go through all these reading of books and everything, we see that this being like these sort of awakenings being the checkered flag, and then you pass, that's it. And of course, the teachers have not talked about that themselves, let alone explain about their own post-awakening suffering. Not that I'm aware of. I may be blissfully ignorant of people who do their own journeys a bit more. But from my experience of teacher-student relationships, in the traditional sense that the teacher is all-knowing, invulnerable to anything, and the student doesn't know anything and looks to the teacher, which in itself is a blockage, of course, when you get attached to the idea of being a teacher. But putting that aside, I think it's really, really important, as you say, that these types of conversations go out. You know, ordinary people who have been through this and are coming out sort of the other side of it, if you like. Of course, they're being, when the I is not there, there is no restriction, everything is coming out. You are becoming a real human for the first time, if you like. You're becoming really human, because you do, when you're sad, you're 100% sad. There's only that. There's no feeling of I shouldn't feel sad, I shouldn't that. There is only sadness, or there is only happiness, or whatever emotion is there. You experience these. You are those in that moment, 100%. So you are becoming a real human, a fully experiencing those fully. But yeah, as you say, with this sort of the transition afterwards, there can be still this residue of, oh, I've had this recognition of I shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't be like. So no, I agree that it's very important that this type of conversation does go out. And that's why I feel that this era of going to the guru, I really think that we're getting beyond that now. That we're moving through into a period of really this being accessible to anyone, of course, thanks to the internet, really, and Zoom, and just ordinary people really feeling that it's accessible to them, and just ordinary people talking about it. I really feel like that. Something I was really I've been sort of thinking about recently is this: when you think about things as on a much grander scale, it really makes more sense. And I talked a little bit about the koshas. It's also very useful to think about the yugas, or the ages of the planet, or our particular solar system, or human consciousness, which is an Indian philosophy, where they have divided the periods of time, where our particular solar system moves away from and towards the center of the Milky Way. And it's divided up into, in English, it's often translated as the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. Iron Age being the Kali Yuga, which we are just kind of, depending on who you listen to, either at the tail end of or out of into the Bronze Age again. So it's this period, and all of the famous sort of teachers, whether it's the Buddha or Adi Shankar or the Jesus Christ, were all within the Kali Yuga. And so it's natural when you think about that. It seems natural that there was this period of one particular person getting it, and then most people not having a clue what he's talking about, and then go to that person, travel thousands of miles on the back of a donkey or a horse or whatever to get to that person in the mountains and sit before them, and that's really where that's come from. And even right into the last century, of course, in its 50s and 60s, when people were starting to go off to India and find their guru, or go off to Japan. Even myself, I did that of thinking I need to go to the Far East to get the answers. Not that it was a conscious thing, but I guess it was maybe there. And I really just feel that we're sort of getting out of that now, that we're coming to the end of that, where it is becoming more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. And I don't know whether this is also due to the simply internet and the fact that more and more people have these conversations, that it sort of gives this impression. I just think that I agree that the era of gurus and people sitting at their feet, and looking at them almost like godlike figures, I don't think it's over yet. I don't actually think it's over yet, but I think it's certainly sort of there's less of that. There's other options that people recognize that are out there. And but I still think I agree that it can happen through conversations, and you can be watching our conversation or somebody else's conversation, or like we were saying, it can happen in all kinds of ways. There are no rules, but I still think that it's one thing to have a conversation between two friends where neither of them recognize their true nature, and is yet another when you have a conversation with friends where at least one of them does, right?
Yes.
So that it can point, you can point then the conversation instead of in that direction, right?
Yeah.
Instead of outwardly, so to speak, because to me that's what it is, which is why we continue to say that it's not so much about words, it's not so much about the concepts, it's more about what they're pointing to, what's before all those concepts, what's before all these labels. And so it really takes one person, and that person doesn't have to be a guru at all. It takes one person to recognize that,
yes,
to then sort of have an impact on others, and their eyes open wider, and they become more curious and open up to it, and that can lead, you know, to their own recognition and so on. But yeah, I'm glad that that period is sort of coming to an end, and that people recognize it more and more, that this is something that's available, you know, to everyone. One of the things that I know so many people are worried about when they start exploring these, maybe not worried, but sort of concerned, maybe slightly hesitant, is this idea that once they awaken, and in particular when they hear that there is this falling away of identity and all those labels and beliefs, then, you know, it's like, what's going to be left of me then, and how whatever is left of me is going to function, you know, in this world, you know, going to work, paying bills. And you kind of started talking about it a little bit. And I think that was actually, if I remember correctly, that was one of your concerns. It was one of the things that you also, I think, thought about, you know, what's going to happen afterwards. So can you talk a little bit about that? What would you say to those who may be curious but afraid of what's going to happen to them afterwards?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, there was a certain amount of fear attached to that in my case, simply because you're attached to this I so much. You think that there is this I, and you try to preserve this I, and you've invested so much energy in this idea that there is an I. You're absolutely petrified of losing it, and you think, again, the mind thinks that it makes these terrible sort of projections come up that you know, you're going to, it's you read things or hear things like falling away, which sounds awfully dramatic, which is really, that's why it's so important to emphasize the fact that it's such an ordinary thing. There is no big, you know, dramatic experience. It's not an experience ultimately. But yeah, of course, in my case, there was quite a lot of fear in that, because I was thinking, oh well, if I, you know, you want to have this enlightenment because you know you're limited, you know you're suffering, you want to, and you believe that enlightenment or whatever is a way out of it, and so you're striving for that, but of course at the same time you think, well, your mind is projected that if there's no more David, if there's no more I, then will I be able to function in society? Will my family think I'm nuts? Will I be treated as an outcast and left to roam the world by myself for years? You know, there's all this mental, you know, crap that goes around and is generated by thoughts, you know, and of course, it's just, all it is just mind stuff. And there is no, as when we recognize that it is all just mind stuff, by stepping back from that and seeing all those machinations and realizing that there is no I, there's nothing that you can grasp onto as being David. There's nothing you can hold as being David. It's just simply a label that was stuck on. Then of course, all that goes away, and the fear evaporates with the I. The fear evaporates. It just evaporates. There is no fear, and that's where you often hear this thing about being fearlessness, and people who have self-realization has occurred. There's this fearlessness, and I think a lot of people misunderstand this, particularly at the seeking stage, where they hear this thing, fearlessness, and they think it's about being terribly brave. And especially, I think, people who have studied Buddhism quite a lot. I know I read a lot of books on Buddhism in the beginning, and you hear things like phrases like the lion's roar, which is a way of explaining, but the words of the Buddha or the teachings of the Buddha are often described as the lion's roar, fearless, you know. And people misunderstand that, thinking that you have to, when you self-realize you're super brave and you're not afraid to sit next to a tiger or whatever it is, you know. But the thing is that there is fearlessness because there's no one to be afraid. There's no one there to be afraid. Therefore, there is fearlessness.
Right.
So anybody who is feeling that fear that their whole world will collapse really need not worry. There is nothing to be afraid of, and never was really, but it's only when you recognize nature that becomes apparent. But yes, all is well. There is nothing, and all the things that you want to do. I mean, I think a lot of people, as you sort of hinted at there, that a lot of people think, well, my whole life will be different, and I won't do all the things I did before. I was chatting to somebody the other day who said, well, does it mean I can still go to the beach? And I was like, yeah, go to the beach. What's stopping you going to the beach? You know, because, you know, your preferences or your idiosyncrasies don't disappear with it, you know, within this entity known that is labeled David. Within this entity, yeah, there's particular idiosyncrasies. I prefer coffee over tea. I like black coffee, and you know, I like nature. Your preferences are still there. There's just this idea that there is an I who is experiencing these things that goes. So sort of from the outside looking in, unless somebody knows you really well, they may not even notice any difference. You know, people who have been with you your whole life, whether it be family members or partner, good friends, they may notice that you might be more peaceful, or you might be more sort of, you know, yeah, whatever, everything's okay, more sort of easy going, or they may notice something like that, or they may not. It doesn't matter. So from sort of another entity looking here, then they may not really notice any difference. It's really within that. There's no resistance there. The I is gone, and everything just sort of carries on as normal, but fully, so that you're really, as you said before, sort of fully functioning properly.
I don't know where this idea again, which is why it goes back to this, how important it is to have that awareness that we continuously operate and function in this ocean of concepts and ideas and everything, and just to be aware of that is so important, so you don't get sucked into one or any idea about what it's like to be awakened and what it should be like in particular. You know, there is no should be like in this, you know, it's just what is, literally moment by moment. And so I think that for me it's so clear that you retain your personality. You can still be pissed off by things that were pissing you off before. You know, you still have preferences, you still have your quirks and stuff like that. And I think just like David and I were talking about it, I think you just embrace it, but your relationship to all of these changes, it's which I think, oh gosh, I wish I was more articulate, but you know, it's sometimes I think people, again, maybe, you know, innocently perpetuate this idea that there is this enlightened way of being and then the human way of being. And to me, it's not either or. You are the human being having the human experience, and you are also the true nature, right? That you are, that infinite being simultaneously. It's not either or situation.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you are only the infinite consciousness, and so and having this human experience is taking place within and as infinite consciousness. Ultimately, that's all there is. And but of course, for the sake of relating to people, we go back into the mind and we talk about, oh, how's your mother, and how's da da da, blah blah blah, and you get on with stuff. And that's absolutely fine. I mean, you just get on with things, but it's all just happening without this feeling of I should be doing, I shouldn't be doing. Is this okay? Is this not okay? It's just everything is allowed to be within that, and this human experience is just happening as it is, and is allowed to just happen within and as consciousness. And when you're in that space, you're that open space, then it's just it's so easy. It's really effortless. It's just an effortless being. It's just it just is.
Yeah, and there's something really liberating in being able to embrace whatever arises in any moment. And I mean genuinely, not trying to embrace it, not to embrace it, but just genuinely just leaning in and embracing whatever comes, including, like I said, those painful moments where there's suffering, and I think at the extreme, because to me there's been, I've had that happening to me for a long time now, that relationship to my pain or suffering when it was occurring was so different to what it used to be, prior the awakening happened. Because prior to it, I would probably, given what's been happening to me recently with all my turmoil and emotions and everything, I would be probably 10, 11 years ago, I'd be calling a therapist thinking that there's something seriously wrong with me and I need help. And, there would be an entire analysis going into this as to why this is happening. And, oh my God. Right. And so and so afterwards, that has completely changed in that, you just, whatever happens. And I'm not saying that I'm enjoying it, right? But actually, the very interesting thing that happened to me recently is that I was in the midst of experiencing this real emotional pain. And I found myself sobbing, like just sobbing, like, one of those, when you like from the depths of you, if that makes sense. And it was incredible that I was experiencing this in this moment, and at this very same time part of me was going, whoa. Like what a ride this is, right? So I know it may sound crazy to some of you who may be listening, but it was almost as if I was enjoying the process of just allowing myself to experience fully, no filters, no resistance. And when when that happened, it was like a roller coaster, right? It's like, wow.
Absolutely. I 100% understand what you're saying. It just comes up. And I had a couple of things like that as well. When there's tears just come, they've been happy tears, they've been sad tears, and they come up unexpectedly. They come up of themselves, and they sort of catch you by surprise. And then you come up and you're like, wow, look, I'm crying my eyes out. Okay, and then it goes and it's finished and it's done, and it was experienced fully. It was allowed to be. It dissipated. Brilliant, And I think because what you were saying about, before there's this sort of conflict, when you recognize yourself to be infinite consciousness, and you recognize that everything is infinite consciousness, i.e., everything is you, then your relationships with everything changes, because you recognize it all as being one. And that's relationships with all objects, and of course relationships with people. And I found, and I'd be interested to hear what you say about this, because I found relationships have of course improved dramatically. And this is another thing about one of the fear factors that we were talking about earlier, that people are often afraid of how will it affect my relationship, because they have seen a guru on a mountaintop with a big beard and or whatever, and thinking that, I don't want to be like that. If I was like that, my family's would think I'm nuts. So people fear, there's fear about that, but of course, once that all dissipates and the fear, there's no fear there, and you are relating. Of course, there are no people there to relate to, but when you're relating, shall we say, with others, entities, you're there as you greet them as yourself, as infinite consciousness. And it was funny when we said right at the beginning, when before we started the interview, we were just, and you said, "Oh, it feels like I've known you forever." And that's been fantastic for me. And of course I felt the same. And recently, in the last few months, there's been wonderful people sort of manifested in my life, yourself and a few others. And when I talk to them, it's just like, "Hey, how are you?" It's like, because there's no resistance there. There's no resistance. So you're fully human, and whatever manifests in that space is allowed to be. And once you go out in the world, into the town or wherever, you're like, "Oh yeah, that person's shouting, that person's angry, okay, fine. That person doesn't like, okay, fine," whatever. And everything is allowed, and everything is recognized as being yourself. So it's really liberating. Yes, good word.
I love how you said it, because I mean, it's so true. I mean, gosh, I mean, relationships alone is a topic that we could probably do a completely separate video on that. But I'm happy to sort of add a few bits and pieces. Yeah. I think there are several things that can happen. One is absolutely that what you've just said, which I love, that you just, because you allow yourself to have a human experience, your own human experience, whatever it is in the moment, fully, yes, by default, you allow others to have their own. Actually. And there's such freedom when you don't have the need to change anybody. You don't even have the need to jump and rescue them. You don't have, there's none of that going on, unless of course invited. If someone is, asking you, can you share some insights about this or that? I still, when I get caught up in whatever drama I have currently, temporarily, I still ask the people that I trust, what do you think about that? And or they will share their insights, right? Because when we're caught up here, we just, it's hard for that wisdom to kick in and show us the way, right? Which also is great. I think it's just part of this experience again. So I think certainly there's more freedom and space all of a sudden in all your relationships, because you're not attaching your well-being or who you are to how someone else is with you. And exactly. So and like I said, you're not trying to change anybody, you're not trying to change their experience, so there's so much of breathing space that all of a sudden is being created, right? And it's very common that people who may have issues with parents who are pissing them off every time they saw them, and some of that, after they experience the awakening, all of a sudden those very problematic parents don't appear to be problematic anymore.
Yeah, that's right. And it's I mean, because there's a liberation in recognizing that whatever is going on is just subconscious mind stuff, nothing personal in it. And I think this is a really key point. And this was something that I'm moving back to Scotland, and coming back to live with my mum after so many years. And this was something that was kind of playing on my mind slightly, because I left Scotland when I was 18, left the family home, and went off and did my thing. And now
that's a really young age to leave and go this far. Yeah,
like 26 years since I've lived in Scotland. And so coming back, being with my mom, and seeing my family, being with my sister and her family, it's absolutely wonderful. And it's where I am now. It's great. Of course, there was a slight thing, in my mind. But well, how is that going to go? Coming back to the sort of the family home. But of course, there are things, there you do feel certain, but I should say, a tension or a certain thing that comes up. But it's immediately recognized as just being a play out of subconscious patterns in that person. My mother has her particular personality, my sister has hers, and so my friend has his, and blah blah blah, and it plays out, and when we relate, when we're there, and it all plays out, and it's allowed to do so, and there's nothing personal in it. There's nothing personal in that. So yeah, there's a great sort of liberation in that, and that then goes for all relationships, because you're approaching everyone from this open space of awareness, and as you correctly said, they sense that, they feel there's a resonance there because that frequency is resonating there, and they feel safe with you. They may say things that they would never maybe say to somebody else. There's an opening up, and therefore a great sort of release in them too. So yeah, absolutely.
And it's amazing how, sometimes people, there's this saying that it takes two to tango, but actually afterwards it proves you that it's not true. It takes one person to recognize this, right? And by default, this other person is picking up on that energy, because that other person is no longer feeling like you're not enough for them. This person is not feeling like they have to change in order to be accepted, or they don't have to fulfill any expectations that you might have. So they relax by default, and they may not even know why this is happening, but it's sort of happening by default, that came from that change that happened in you. And so this is, it's absolutely amazing. And this is why I also, how they sometimes say that the spiritual teachers will say, well, if you want to see how awakened you are, go and spend time with your family, like a prolonged period of time. And I see where they're heading with this, but actually, I think then some people may have this tendency of like, okay, so now I'm awake and I'm going to spend 10 days with my family. So I need to make sure that I show how Zen I am, and I have to try to restrain myself, just to practice this, Zen healing or whatever. But actually, that's not what it's about. It's not about pretending. It's about going into it fully. So if there is a meltdown happening because your mom, is not happy with where you left your clothes or your cup, good, fine, have the meltdown. You have yours, she can have hers. It's fine. It's like you said, it's not personal. But I think in terms of relationships, the other thing that I wanted to add is I think very often relationships, and this has certainly been my case in particular recently, certain connections or relationship, they don't have to be romantic at all. It can be between parents, or it can be between whoever. They can actually bring stuff to light, those sort of last attachments, last conditionings, when you least expect it. And this has certainly been my case. I've never claimed that I was sorted, but I kind of, for the last 10 years, I felt like I'm kind of, I've been sort of constant. I was sort of, like things have been fine. Even when things have not been fine, I've been fine. And so when that turmoil recently kicked in, I was shocked, because I was like, where the hell did that come from? Right. And I'm actually glad that it happened, because it really highlighted that there's still stuff. It has nothing to do with my mind. No. It is something that literally feels like it's in my body still, like you said, absorbed. Is that absorbed conditioning or absorbed whatever, that is still playing out. And I think it's so important. I mean, I'm glad that it happened, because it taught me that this process never ends. And, in 2 years, in 5 years, 10 years from now, something else is going to be highlighted.
And it's exactly what you said that earlier about there is a mistake to think that something is finite, there's a goal, and that's it. It's not. It's just going on. It's just this. The only constant in it all is your own being. The other stuff, the life stuff, is constantly changing and going on, and it's allowed to do so. And you're absolutely also correct in this, the fact that the relationship is so important, and that's why it's a mistake for a lot of people to think that they need to go to a mountaintop cave and stay there for 20 years, and all the problems will be solved. Because you bet your life when they come back down to the real world, that they will not be prepared for that. So yeah, it's in the relationship. We are social creatures, sort of the apparent human being.
And those relationships can absolutely highlight and bring to light things that we have not been aware of, that still need sort of, I wouldn't say dealing with, but there's freedom to be found in those things still,
Yeah, and there's not even a sort of need to deal with it or a need or anything. It just is. It just is. So long as you perceive, so long as you sense and perceive, things will be absorbed from the apparent outside world. As we now know, there is no inside and outside, but outside of this entity, let's say, not outside of consciousness, but outside of this entity, things are perceived and sensed, and they have an echo in the physical organism as well. And that just all becomes so clear, and then whatever comes out of that from a relationship, or if that triggers something that you've been hiding in your subconscious for years and that pops out, fine, great, brilliant. So it's just,
absolutely. And I think that's the difference. Again, keep on going back to this, that it comes up, whatever comes up, even when it's painful, you did not expect it and everything. There's no longer this should not be happening. There is no longer trying to resist it. There's no longer trying to understand why, because I think the analysis is the ultimate killer. It's like when you go into the analysis, because there's analysis and there's analysis. To me, there's a difference between analysis and reflection, self-reflection. To me, self-reflection leads to really beautiful insights that allow you to see an issue for what it is, and therefore it's sort of it transcends sort of on its own. Whereas analysis is when we move to the head, and we start going into all kinds of stories and ideas about, oh my God, why is this happening? This must mean this about me, or this might mean that. And I think it's when we go there and start doing that not only that pain that we're experiencing persists, we keep it alive, but we just create even more additional emotional turmoil because of that.
Correct, and that's why when we step out of that and we find out what is prior to all of that mind stuff, and then we recognize what is prior to that, then all doubts disappear. There are no doubts, and so there are no questions anymore. They are answered, and so there's no need to analyze anything that comes up. Everything is allowed to be. It's recognized that it was just absorbed, it was maybe pushed down, and when that all comes out, it's allowed to be so. There's no questioning and analyzing of why it is or why it was or why did I do that and whatever. It's all those things just evaporate, because absolutely everything comes from just really all questions just come from a handful of 2 or 3, and then all of those just come from the fact that you don't know who you are. And it just all sort of funnels down to this one, the primordial question, which is, who am I? And when realized, doubts and all subsequent questions disappear, and then you're just left in your pristine state. And and that's it's beautiful. It's just left, and after that, whatever is coming is allowed to come, and it really just sort of like absorbed in infinite love and dissipates.
And you kind of it goes from this sort of acceptance to literally welcoming, not just accepting what arises, in particular when it's unpleasant, but it goes almost as far as welcoming it, because you know that it's almost, and again, I know that we're going into language and concepts, but it's just the way I feel it and see it, how it just clears the way for that awakening to sort of trickle down, so that it becomes embodied in some way. So you become that, you operate from that, because I think this is why David, one of the things that I love that he also mentioned in our conversation was that this is why there are certain people who, for example, did some therapy or dealt anyway in some way with their traumas, or just basically with their psychology. They tidied up their psychology, and so when they awaken, it's like there's space for the awaken to trickle down their body, and it's sort of, and then it doesn't cause any disruption sort of afterwards. Whereas for many people who haven't done that psychology comes up to the surface after the awakening.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why that's really ties into what you were saying about, choosing it if you are as a teacher or some kind of coach, and you're with people who believe in the fact that they're a separate being, that, you need to judge how you're speaking to them. This whole wrecking ball approach of, we talked about before, everybody is in a slightly different situation, and you need to be quite to how that you're dealing with that. And so that's why for certain people, things like meditation is really recommended. And I was thinking about this quite a lot recently. It's interesting, we should be talking about it. And it kind of made me laugh that when I was living in Japan, I practiced archery, which I mentioned at the beginning, and Zen archery, as it's often known. And of course, when you start that, you're absolute total beginner, but you feel that it may be it's a sort of spiritual pursuit. And they say within the world of Zen archery that the great masters of Zen archery no longer have the need for a bow or arrow. Now, okay, I get that now, of course, but can you imagine if I went to my very first lesson in Zen archery and the teacher just said, you know what, you don't really need this. You already are that. You don't really need a bow and arrow. But I want to, I just thought, it made me laugh. I was sitting laughing to myself like a creep when I thought about that. But it really made you think, well, it's so necessary that for some people, yes, meditation is necessary. For some people, maybe not. And everybody who, as you say, may have gone through some kind of psychotherapy or some kind of therapy sessions, may be better prepared for this than, say, somebody who hasn't. But it's a really interesting point that you make.
Yeah. And again, we go back to how important it is to just, for anyone who's talking about it, to remember what it was like before they experience the awakening. Because that's when you can meet that other person in a deeper way. And I agree that sometimes actually extreme teaching, like there's nobody, there's nothing, there's no meaning, it can actually shake up someone to an extent that it will actually trigger an awakening, because it was like a shock to the system, and wherever they, okay, it can have that effect. I can recognize that.
It also can have the opposite effect.
But it can also have, absolutely, it can also be incredibly dangerous. Absolutely. But, we never know you know, we never know how it's going to come about. But what I'm saying is that exactly what you said, it's important to remember what it was like, and when you meet the other person who's just at the beginning of this journey, and to meet them where they're at, as opposed to drop few bombs like this, you know. It's like, you know, I really don't think it serves anybody. And I think that I think, and I don't know whether you agree, that I think one of the reasons, if there is a reason, that we, you know, experience awakening is so that we can talk about it, and so more and more people can see it for themselves. And by the way, I want to make it very clear that I'm not talking here about preaching. I'm not talking here, hey, I'm awakened now and I now want to, you know, impose what I know on you, or I want you to awaken because it's going to be good for you. No, I'm talking about people who are, you know, talking about it to people who are open to it, because I think that this is happening also quite a lot, as I've been made aware, that some people, you know, awaken, and I understand that they're so excited to discover their true nature that they want everyone to know about this. And there is this like tendency to start, you know, preaching and looking down even sometimes to people who are not awakened yet, you know. And I have this wisdom and you don't, so therefore let me show you. Not what I'm talking about here. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the looking down thing, I think, tends to happen really when you first get that, in my case, and it was that when you first get that separation between the awareness and the I, and you realize that you're not the body mind, and you are this I, which is somehow above everybody else. It's like you're, and I image of me sort of climbing up this mountain, and I'm making all this spiritual journey up this mountain. You know, here I am, and then I've realized this. You know, not the body, and you guys down there, you still don't get it, but I get it.
Isn't it awful?
Yeah, it was such arrogance, and it was like a real sort of spiritual arrogance, and I got stuck there for a bit, because you do feel this, wow, all right, great, here's me, and I'm so awesome now, and you still don't get it, and that really can be, and it's quite common, I think, for people to be in that position, and of course you get through that. But no, you're right about this whole sort of the preaching thing is very sort of dangerous and ultimately ineffective, because you know, when you like somebody who's an alcoholic, and you say, you know, you shouldn't drink, and they'll go, yeah, I know. And then, unless they themselves it comes from them themselves, then there's very little chance that it may, you know, make any difference. But it's really related to what we were talking about earlier, in that when you are this open space, you're relating to people with no resistance, and they then naturally resonate at that frequency, feel no resistance, and then open up, and these things come. And I'll tell you a funny little story about this. Actually, it was kind of regarding my sister, who I didn't really think was my sister's brilliantly positive person, and since I've been talking recently in the last few months, you know, I've been of course open and on the internet and whatever about what this self-realization. So she's seen what's been going on. And she realized that one of her friends was interested in the law of attraction. And so she started thinking a bit more about that. And she told me this funny story that I was asking her, she took a holiday with her family. She's got 2 young kids, and she took them on holiday a few weeks back. And the kids were worried that they were going to get stuck at traffic lights all the way, and they weren't going to get to the holiday destination. And my sister would say to them, oh, you know, don't worry, the green light fairy will take care of it. And what she was trying to do, she was literally using this law of attraction to try to make sure that the lights would be green all the way up to their holiday place. And I think 9 times out of 10 they were. And the kids were amazed by this and thought that the green light fairy was taking care of it all. But it was just something that I just thought, wow, you know, that's a resonance that's come there. Some topic of conversation which has come out, which we have never talked in all the years we've been brother. never discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And so really connected to what you were saying there and that's one small example, but it's where you're resonating, you're open, you're absolutely allowing everything to be, and people will feel that and resonate too. So that's
Exactly.
very, very
I think, and this is why it's so much better and more effective when people pick up on that presence in you, they are so much more likely to open up, because usually they go, or for example, they notice that you have changed. They notice that you went from a neurotic person to kind of, less neurotic, or completely zened out. And they'll become curious. What happened? They'll start asking questions, or what are you reading? What is it that you're talking about? And this is the best way for this to come about, as opposed to putting the preacher's hat and start imposing or preaching or trying to change someone. And I do recognize that very often, like you said at the beginning, you're on such high because you want everybody to see who they truly are. You want everybody to experience this for themselves, right? But and there's also, I think it's very much part of the process. But this is, it's just, it brings the opposite, the opposite result. People actually completely close off and they don't want to listen. I actually, it wasn't with me. It wasn't as much as strong as it happened to you. To me, it was I was like a subtle spiritual asshole, as I call it. For a moment, I was I call it the spiritual asshole. It was like someone was sharing their problems, and sometimes I would say it out loud, and only with like closest people or family. Or I would thinking in my head as soon as they were sharing some kind of issues, and I'm not talking about some serious traumas or anything. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about some daily dramas and stuff like that. And I'd be sitting there, and looking at them. It's just a thought, when and when you say something like this to someone who is caught up in their drama, you really come across as an asshole who has no compassion. So yes, I went through my spiritual asshole stage, but it didn't last too long, thankfully. Anyways, David, we have been we have gone over the planned time, which is kind of, I got a gist of that very soon into our conversation. This is what was going to happen, so I just let it happen.
That's why I went to the toilet just before we started. I fell in my
I don't really have any other questions left in me at this moment. And by the way, I just came up with this idea. I don't know how you feel about this. If anyone is watching this and you have some questions that perhaps you may want David or but mostly David to to talk about, then please let us know, because we can always or maybe if there are questions that come up for me that I kind of forgot to ask, maybe then we can hop on Zoom again and we can absolutely address those questions. I promise that if I have nothing wise to say, I'll shut up, and I will never just try to answer a question in particular if I don't feel like anything is coming up that would be of value. But so that's an option for everyone if you're happy with that. And finally, is there anything else that you feel inclined to say? Is there anything that you may want to say to someone, in particular, someone who's just at the beginning sort of this journey and becoming a seeker? Is there anything, let's say this is, I'm hoping this is not your last conversation, but let's say this is your last conversation, the last opportunity to impart, the bits of wisdom, and what would you? Is there anything that you feel like saying?
Yeah, I would say don't seek. you're already that. is really all you can say. I mean, of course, it depends on each person how you would sort of talk to them. But the fact of the matter is, you are already what you're seeking.
Mm-hmm.
And going round and round the houses, reading this, and really satisfying your mental machinations is really not going to get you anywhere. So yeah, it's really just realizing what is prior to all of that, recognizing the fact that you cannot doubt your own being, and you just come back to that and come back to that, because you are always that. You cannot doubt your own existence in this moment. So one constant through all of that. So stay there.
I was going to add something, but I'm not going to spoil it.
The end.
The end. So thank you so much, David. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope that we'll continue just to continue to talk about these things, because it's just so amazing, and to me this is the most fascinating and fun part of this, that it's such an incredible exploration that never ends. There's always sort of more to see and discover, and that's what makes it worthwhile and fun for me. So thank you so much. Okay, guys, so let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, or you can email me. I'm going to leave my email address in the description, and also I'm going to leave David's details, his website, in case you may wish to contact him or talk to him. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.